What'd you do this week, Ryan?
No. So last week
What'd you do this week?
I wrote a lot of Ember.
No, not something code. Just share something with the
like
audience
what
that
I
has
do for
nothing to do
fun?
with code. Just I need a break. What'd you do for fun? We hung out this weekend.
So I had the joint between two pieces of drywall on my ceiling cracked.
Hashtag home ownership.
Yeah, it cracked. So I've been applying joint compound, sanding that guy down, taping it up. The joys of owning a home.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what you said. Like the mortgage payment becomes the minimum amount that you will ever spend on your home every month.
Well, yeah. And also, too, this was like, I had to buy $30 worth of stuff at Home Depot.
Yeah.
But if I had hired like a contractor to fix this, it would have, instead of taking like a whole week, it would have taken 3 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably would have been pretty penny there.
Yeah. So you decide, have you hired anyone to do anything yet?
No, we have an electrician coming tomorrow. So I'm actually going to be out tomorrow morning. I guess this is how I formally tell you that I won't be coming to work tomorrow.
I approve. Was it for like your recessed lighting stuff?
No, I've did that myself.
Oh.
Katie got Nest cameras.
Oh.
And we're getting those installed. So
cool.
Yeah.
To keep your eye on Nala.
That's a little out of, no, they're outdoor cameras. It's not like that's going to stop anyone from doing anything.
Oh, is it like the commercial where it's like the guy's on the treadmill and he's like, you better watch out, buddy. That's going to be you. You're going to have your iPhone up here and you're trying to work and you're going to see some hooligan coming, stealing your Amazon packages.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a camera's not going to stop them.
Is it just there to deter, like the old ADT sign with the blue thing?
It's there to make your wife happy. Happy wife, happy life.
Cool. So we left off last week talking about whether or not we trust our test suites, and it was kind of an interesting conversation. So do we have any new insights on that question?
Earlier this week I put like a debug statement in one of my handlebars templates. I just curly user.relationship name close curlies, just because I wanted to see it rendering in the template. I accidentally left that in and pushed it to production. We caught it in staging, so it never went fully to production. But the test suite passed, and I merged it. And in the back of my head, I was like, "Yeah, I guess I can't really trust my test suite here, huh?"
Now, did it break any functionality?
No. It was just a weird, people were like, "Why is this thing showing up here?"
Yeah.
Actually, I don't even know if anyone else noticed. I noticed, though.
Yeah. But that made you think about this question.
It made me think about this. I was like, yeah, I guess I did ship broken code and my tests were green.
Right. So we were talking about this in the context of kind of auto-updating dependencies because I started using this tool, Dependabot, to update the dependencies for some of my add-ons, and I want to start using it for EmberMap's code base. And the question is basically if you are, it's actually a pretty narrow question. Like you could take this further, but the narrowest version of this is if you have an update, I guess it's not the most narrow. If you have an update to a dependency, let's say Ember source goes from 3.7 to 3.8 and your package JSON says 3.7 and up, do you trust a bot to make a PR that pushes it to 3.8 and merges it without your consent or without your approval, like express, without you like actually opting in and looking at it? And then I guess you can take that further and say, what if you go from 3.8 to 4.0? So there's a few different ways to think about this. Technically, first, we mentioned last week or a few weeks ago that semver is really just a convention. It's not a guarantee. So you could have a project go from 3.8.1 to 3.8.2. And within the constraints of your package JSON, maybe it says 3.8.x. And so you could just expect to be able to merge that in because that declaration is you saying my add-on works with 3.8 any version of this thing. We've talked before about why you want, especially on the add-on side, like the library side, to have lenient dependencies so that it works with a wide range so that your consumers don't have to have like tons of duplicate versions of projects. So you can imagine like Lodash, like 3.x, it works with any version there. But technically speaking, if Lodash goes from 3.8.1 to 3.8.2, it could break the world. There could be a bug there that just is a showstopper bug, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the question is like, well, even on patch updates, you don't really trust the semver version. You need to wait for your test suite to pass. So that means like, do you trust semver or do you trust your test suite? And so you say, well, you trust your test suite.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes.
That's like the fallback. Like the test suite is kind of like the ultimate source of truth in terms of whether or not dependency X works with my project.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the ultimate source of truth is like your production error log, right? Like,
yeah.
I would say, and also I guess it depends on the project. Like I think when we write Ember code, we're pretty good about like not using private APIs.
Yeah.
So and also Ember is pretty good about, like Ember is really good about just not changing APIs. They're not just going to break an API.
Right.
So I think if something like Ember upgrades from 3.8.0 to 3.8.1 and our test suite passes, yeah, I'm okay merging that.
Right. But there's some level of trust there.
Yes.
Like you're not actually looking at the code changes.
Yes. I'm not even like pulling down the pull request and running it on my computer and verifying it.
And you don't actually know what's changed in the library from 3.8.0 to 3.8.1.
Yes. Yep.
So then the question is, what about changes that are like major version changes, like 3 to 4, and like why is that different than the minor version or the patch version?
I think with major versions, there's sort of a social contract that's like, this is when I might be adding in some riskier stuff. So yeah, that makes me want to, I mean, I'm definitely going to read the changelog there.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely going to read like if there's a release post or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm probably going to pull down the code and run it, especially if it's like, you know, the Stripe JS went from 3.0 to 4.0. Yeah, I'm going to want to, that's something that could be really bad if that broke. So I'm going to use my judgment and run that.
So how does that affect our judgment of our test suites? Does that mean we don't trust them? Does that mean our test suites are about testing different kinds of things than all of this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think our test suite is more like happy path testing, but it doesn't, there's a lot that can slip by our test suite. Our test suite is basically for like, I was developing this feature. So while I was developing the feature, I was using the app. So you did have a human looking at the app and interacting with it. And then I'm ready to deploy the code. And so just run a bunch of automated tests. So I think that's why our test suite exists. Like while I was developing feature X, I just want to make sure I didn't break other parts of the website.
Right. And when we talk about like working on teams and stuff, and teams can talk about whether they have a test suite such that they are confident in merging it, right? Merging changes because they're very confident. Like if someone were to start working on features in EmberMap, a new developer, and they had a feature that we liked the look of the code, the test suite helps us see that they haven't broken anything else in the site, right? Mm-hmm. But again, it's not foolproof.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
So what you said last week was kind of like you don't blindly trust it, but you still trust it. And there's this kind of the trust but verify thing.
Right. And I'll add it really does depend on what's changing. And I know there's like a lot of information in my head, but like if it's something like Stripe, I'm going to be way more suspicious because bad things happen when Stripe breaks. But if it's something like, I don't know, a tooltip library, I'm not so worried about that. There's no, yes, the site would be broken if tooltips didn't work, but it's less risky.
Right. I also think it's interesting to think about what aspects of this are like incidental complexity versus inherent, and which are the parts that could be kind of automated away, or that sometimes you look at a changelog and you're just looking for APIs that you use and whether they've changed or not. Now in Elm, they take this to like the next level where the semver stuff is kind of like a derived value of the APIs of the library, I think. Although when we were talking about all the dependent bot stuff, it's kind of like you can have a situation where you go from 3x to 4x, and in your changelog as the author, you're saying no longer works with node 6, but you actually haven't broken your add-on for node 6 in your 4x release. But once you get to 4.3, that's when you start doing things that break in node 6. But in your 4.2 to 4.3 release notes, you're not going to be talking about node 6 because you as the author already said in 4x, node 6 is not supported.
Right.
So that was part of the problem where even if you had a really reliable test suite, when you go to 4x, you've now bumped your major version constraint in your package JSON, your test passed, and so you say, I'm good to go. Little did you know that the intention of the author is to drop support for node 6, but your thing still says it supports node 6. All of a sudden, later on, the thing goes from 4.2 to 4.3, you bump it, everything breaks, and you have basically no idea why.
Now, even though the author, when they released version 4.0 and they stated that they were going to remove support for node 6, and they didn't, they could still do something so that add-on won't work in my node 6 application. So they could change like the engine field.
Right.
So I could still get that feedback before I could still
take
get
a harder case. The harder case is where they change an API from public to private, but it still exists as an implementation detail.
Yep.
On an object.
And in JavaScript, there's no private API. Right. So even though it's like this is truly intention.
I mean, you can use closures to like hide information or whatever. Anyways, they could refactor it. Like when at 4.3, they decide normalize is no longer a function. You were relying on it, but they just completely get rid of it as part of a refactor. But you have code that relies on normalize, and it worked in 4x. So you say, oh, my thing works with Mirage 4x. And you forgot, since you didn't read the changelog, you didn't realize that you were relying on normalize, and it has become private. And so now you've bumped your thing to 4.x. And again, 6 months down the road, someone comes and bumps it from 4.2 to 4.3. It breaks because normalize has been refactored, and you have no idea why.
Well, okay, tell me why this is wrong. One solution is you now release 5 instead of 4.3.
So that was the other conversation that we were having, which is like if you put yourself in the shoes of the person who says normalize is no longer public API, and they cut the 4.0, and but they don't actually do anything that will break someone's app who's using normalize, and then 4.3 comes around and they refactor it, and it changes it. Should they release a 5x? And the answer is like no. The answer is no, because there was a good strain of argument that led me to believe that.
I think one of
the root is the author intention. It kind of trumps everything, because there's one thing Dan Freeman pointed out was that there's so many ways you could actually rely on behavior based on the way module systems load, based on all sorts of things, that you can't make the statement that because it worked in this version and it doesn't work in this, therefore that's a breaking change and you need to do a major, because there's so many things like that.
Basically everything would be a major.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So exactly. Everything that changed that could be behavior that was supported in one version, not the next. You could argue like technically that's breaking, so it's a major, but that kind of defeats. What's the point then?
Right.
What's the point?
Right. Because everything's a major. Yeah. Okay. So what about this? What if you said as a library author, I think that there are people relying on normalize. So in this situation, I'm going to release a major, whereas, because it was public and it went to private.
Yeah, it's like an intimate API kind of thing.
Yeah, and I know people, like I had this in my docs at one point, so I know people might be relying on it. Whereas if you refactored like _A to _B, okay, those are two private methods.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing with Mirage right now. I'm getting ready for 1.0, and there's just like a few small changes, but I'm definitely going to make sure, like, if you rely on those things, your thing is not going to work in 1.0, and hopefully you'll get feedback from it, because I feel like that's the best way to do it. That's the best way to communicate. There's definitely times where you need to prepare for those things, but you're not able or it doesn't make sense to do something right away. And so you need to communicate it. But I think they said like it's good to try to think about ways to like communicate it with more than just a changelog, like an engines field saying node 6 is no longer supported or something like that, or deprecation warning, you're still using a deprecated API, something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just interesting thinking about the Elm ecosystem where this is basically like part of the tooling. And like,
I just had an idea.
there's just a lot of pain associated with like, this is a lot, this is not a fun part of the job. Like, I want to just upgrade the thing, and if it works with the way I'm using it, I'm done. And ideally, you would, 2 weeks ago, I would have said, well, that's your test suite that tells you that. If you're using Ember Modal Dialog and you use these 3 APIs from it, doesn't matter that it has 20 APIs, doesn't matter that one of those 17 you're not using changed from version 3 to version 4. You're using those 3, they're the same, just pump the version. Why should you have to read the entire changelog, all this stuff? But right now, I mean, it's just more complicated than that. But in Elm, I'm not sure how far they get with this stuff. I'm not sure if they don't have to think about this stuff or not. Or if it's just that the stronger semver stuff is there and it like kind of catches your back a little bit more.
I mean, it can't account for the intent. So,
right.
And then also too, if you do a bug fix, you have a function that takes a string and returns a string. That's not going to change the type signature of the function.
Right.
So Elm isn't going to tell you it's a breaking change.
Right.
But
it has changed behavior.
Yeah. You as a developer change that behavior. So someone might have been relying on your bug.
Yeah. I guess this is why we all still have jobs, right? As long as the stuff is kind of messy and you have to use a combination. Now, the semver stuff does work pretty well overall. It helps a lot.
Yeah.
And the fact that a tool like Dependabot can do as much as it does is a pretty good testament to that. So props to that, I guess. But there's a lot, I feel like, about package management in JavaScript that is leaves to be desired. But
do you think
it does work well in a lot of cases?
Do you think that comes from the fact that there's so many packages? Like a typical Ember app or just really any SPA is just going to have so many dependencies.
Yeah. Like that graph. If you look at node modules, basically, it's absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Cool. Well, I think Node 6 is we only have
until April for Node
14 days left. Node 6. Yeah.
Or Node 8. I think Node 6 has been.
No, I think it's Node.
It's Node 6.
Yeah, it's Node 6. I think we have Node 8 for a while.
Yeah, the other thing here is like, if I'm just understanding this stuff in the last few weeks, and like, also the whole thing about somewhere this started was like someone installed Mirage in their app. They ran a fresh install without like a log file, and it pulled in like a transitive dependency that had broken something else. And so it's like, that actually doesn't work with that version of Mirage, but we kind of talked about all that. But this stuff works better the more people understand how to use semver, what constitutes a breaking change, how to communicate breaking changes. It all works much better when people do that stuff. When people use lock files where they're supposed to, and some of that stuff is like tribal knowledge that some people disagree about, or that you have to kind of ask to find out. So maybe part of it is just the education thing too, which is just that there could be more education, or there could be more guidelines around how to do this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in the past few weeks, has your semver strategy completely changed?
No, it's just like with one of my dependencies bumps a major and it drops Node 6 support, how do I need to think about that for my users?
I see.
And does that mean I need to bump my major? If it changes my external behavior, it does. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. But it's kind of, it's just confusing. It just gets confusing quickly.
Yeah. Yep.
Also, it was like, if my dev dependencies change, do I ever need to worry about that? If my test pass, can I just do that all the time? Because dev dependencies don't affect the end user.
Well, is this in an application or an add-on?
An add-on.
Okay, so I would say no.
You can always merge it if the test pass.
Well, okay, so you might break something that you might break the development experience.
Right.
I don't know.
Your add-on doc site, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you break the end user experience, the consumer
I don't
experience?
think so. I don't think it's possible, right? Because it's dev dependency.
If there's like a dependency. Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I don't know enough.
All right, that's enough about dependencies. We've talked about them for like every week for the last 4 weeks. I hereby ban all talk of dependencies until 2021. What do you think about that?
That works.
Cool.
Can we just ban it like everywhere? Like
just ban all dependencies?
just all dependencies. They're all banned.
Yeah, I was just playing with modifiers this morning.
Oh yeah.
Octane modifiers I made a video. They're pretty sweet. There's actually like a flurry of really interesting activity going on right now in like Ember RFC land.
Yes.
Yehuda's been writing up some RFCs, which is always good to see.
Always a good sign.
Modifiers are super cool. We're actually going to have Chris on to talk about some of the stuff he's been writing about and working on recently.
We actually just had Chris on to talk about some of the stuff.
That's right.
So that's the amazing thing about podcasts. You can record them at different times that you release them.
The modifier thing is really cool. It's a pretty powerful way to like get a reference to an element. So a modifier, so basically Ember's already had modifiers for a long time. There's just never been a way to write custom modifiers. There's an action modifier. And that's what was the first way ever to do action binding to like click events. So you have like a button and then you just do action toggle drop down. And the action is like what they call in element space. Now with closure actions, we can do button on click equals action. That's a different thing entirely. It's a helper. That's an action helper, which plucks the function off the action's hash, binds it to the right context, and then passes it into the element to be used as an event handler. But when you do it just in an element space, kind of floating there, it's a modifier. And now we can write our own modifiers. And it's so cool because when a modifier runs, basically runs when the element gets like appended to the DOM, and then it also has like a hook when it gets removed that you can use to clean up any work you've done, and you get access to the actual element itself. So there's a lot of times where I have to do things like I'm trying to tether like a drop down or a popover or a tooltip to an element, and I just add like a data dash attachment dash ID attribute to it.
Just to add on to that, I have in EmberMap's code base. There's like a pop-up menu thing, and it's a contextual component that yields out a thing you can attach to the actual pop-up menu, an action to trigger the pop-up menu. And so we use this all over the place to just build these menus.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I use this thing, I have to go open the component, be like, yeah, the thing that I attach to, like, how does that work? Well, that's like a CSS selector that then I like apply to like this data attribute, where really I just want this element modifier. I want to be able to yield out something to attach to an element.
Right. So, yep, we've come up with lots of APIs for this kind of thing. Like the contextual component could yield out some sort of marker that you use somehow. It could even render like I've done one where it's like the contextual thing says like context.toggle, and that renders like an A tag, and you can put your stuff there, and then like toggle dot like body or context.body. But you want to give all the rendering back to the consumer and just be able to mark it easily. The other crappy thing about those is like you have to nest it all the time. So you have some anchor tag there, and you want to add a drop down, and like your API requires that you wrap it all in like an ancestor contextual component. So now you have to like nest it, and like if you have a bunch of A's, now this one's over just because that one has a tooltip, that sucks.
Yeah, if I had like a pop-up that rendered a pop-up that rendered a pop-up, it would just, the template would look bizarre.
So this is really cool because there's ways to do this without basically changing any of that. It's very composable in the same way that HTML attributes are composable. Like you can add an href, you can add a class, you can add an ARIA role, and like adding an ARIA role doesn't change anything about the rest of that stuff. It's awesome. It's like a mixin. So these are kind of like mixins, actually.
Mixins for elements.
Yeah, they kind of are.
Yep.
I love mixins. I miss them.
Now, what element modifier add-on did you use? Did you use
Spencer's? So Chris Garrett's blog post about modifiers explains that what was merged in 3.8 Ember 3.8 is like this thing called a modifier manager, which is similar to like the component manager they released. Instead of committing to an API for Glimmer components, they released a component manager on which all kinds of components are built so that they can experiment with different end user APIs. It's the same thing for the modifier manager. So the modifier manager lets you create a way to make modifiers. It's like a modifier maker factory. And then, so Spencer has something called like make functional modifier. It's called like Ember functional modifiers, and it gives you a function called make functional modifier. And, you know, conceptually, again, you render that helper in that element space. It kind of has like a did insert and a will destroy. The way that you as a user can hook into that as an app developer to write an abstraction, the function, this make functional modifier thing, is like it runs when it comes in, and then you can return a function to run when it goes out. You could also imagine eventually there being some sort of class-based API where you have like import modifier from like @ember/modifier, export default modifier.extend or extends modifier if you're like an ES6 class, and then it has like a did insert and a will destroy hook. You can do service injection, all that kind of stuff.
Similar to like a component lifecycle.
Exactly. So I would like to see that in Ember because I'm a fan of those APIs that we already are used to using.
Now, has someone made a class-based modifier manager?
I don't think so. I think Spencer just wanted to try out the function version. It's similar to React hooks, how they work, and all the information was there in the post. So he basically just took that and implemented it.
Very
so
cool.
you could come up with any sort of crazy API to make a modifier, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you make it because the end user API is the same. You do the thing, your custom modifier, in the same way you would use action.
Yep.
So it's really just about how the best way to make those things. But the composition story on the use end is pretty sweet. So yeah, just like in the future, I could install your add-on, which uses class-based modifiers, and I could install this other add-on, which uses functional, but I would bring them both in my app in the same way. So me as the app developer, I don't care how it's implemented. Right. But eventually there will be probably like one way to do it because it's Ember.
Yeah, all of these add-ons will battle it out, and one will make it back to Ember.
Exactly. So I installed this thing, and I did it with a tooltip, and we have like this dumb UI tooltip component that we've used a couple times in EmberMap's code base, and you can just like render it and render attached to with a string, and then like the string is a CSS selector. So any CSS selector that's available, it will attach itself, like using tether.js. And using a full component is great because you can pass a block of HBS to it, but most of the time we just pass text. So I was thinking, what if we could that's one of those cases where you have like that label and attachment thing, and you want to get to that point-free bliss, that point-free programming bliss where you don't do that. And so what if you could just do tooltip right in element space on anything you want? And I think eventually, maybe even now, these things will also actually work on components themselves. I'm not sure how that will work, but you can do it on any HTML element. It'll render a tooltip, and it just attaches it to itself. And you can even, with this hook, add like event handlers. So instead of just rendering the thing, it actually, since it has access to the element instance, you can add event listener, mouse, enter. And then what I do is I like push that text in that element to like a global service, and then use that global service to like render the tooltips. And then on mouse leave, you change the service and it hides them. So then it's like, it's like so easy to add tooltips. It's like our button that says autoplay next video is always kind of not clear. I can just go there and add a tooltip.
Yeah.
Or the little lock means of premium video. So I can just go add tooltip. This video is premium.
I think I have a video on EmberMap of me making that original UI tooltip.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny. It's like, before you did this element modifier thing, could we render tooltip? The answer is yes.
Did we render tooltips?
No.
Well, it was sitting in production, commented out in one spot.
The tooltip was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly why, but it's just like, it's kind of a pain to use.
Yeah, I mean,
if I was working on an application and I had a product requirement, like I would use it no problem. It's more just like,
right, the can you do it thing is yes.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean to do it? Okay, so you do like a mouse over, mouse enter. You trigger an action that mutes is showing tooltip to true. Then you have a block of handlebars somewhere else. It's like if is showing tooltip, then you render UI tooltip with your block of text. Like that's
you're just not going to do that, especially if you
really
have 5
easy.
controls in your video control, and now you have to name is showing fast forward tooltip is showing and then like, oh, do I need to like just set a variable for the
yes
no.
Yeah,
you don't want to think about any of that.
It's a tiniest amount of friction,
but it's enough, kill it. I totally agree.
And,
I mean,
and this what you came up with, you just drop into the element. It's like there's nothing. Do I need a tooltip here? Yeah, why not? Tooltip blah blah blah.
Yeah,
pretty nice,
real nice. It made me think of like if you were building like a GUI for building UIs, like if you were doing like WinForms app or something like that, this is kind of how, if you're using Sketch, it's kind of how you work in those tools. Like you click on the square and then you change the color, and you don't have to interrupt your flow and think, how am I going to do this? And it's the same thing when you have to start saying like, how am I going to name this variable? How am I going to keep these things separate? Like you're kind of derailing. You're off the train, right? You just want to be doing the business logic stuff. So if you had a GUI for like building UIs, then you would have your UI here, and then you would like have a tooltip, and you'd click on it, and you'd like just drag a line directly to the element that you wanted, and you wouldn't think about hierarchy. You wouldn't change anything like that.
You wouldn't name it, so
lexical scope. You wouldn't think about any of that stuff. You would name it. And so this is like very, very close to that. It's pretty awesome. So I like want to think about more ways to do this. Now, of course, like it is constrained in that like you only pass in a string. But for this use case, it's really cool.
Hey, and on that's something else I want to add. You didn't get rid of UI tooltip.
Right.
You use a service to render UI tooltips based off what this element modifier calls. So if I needed to drop down to like actually do an if statement with some handlebars rendered inside of the tooltip, maybe I'm doing like font awesome icons in there. I totally have that. I have that escape hatch.
Yep.
So I think that's another like really good point. Really powerful point about this element modifier abstraction.
Right. Super constrained, makes it really consistent, easy to use. But it's also, you have the low level escape hatch that you can drop down to. So yeah, there's some other examples from like the RFC and the repo that are like scrolling to an element. I was going to also think about doing something where you could like drop like a fade in and up on any element. And like the first time you scroll to it, it adds like a CSS animation that just does that, and like that's awesome. And like think how much more you would use that. Like how often do animations just get punted on because they're not, it's like just feels like way too much work.
Yeah, if I had to think about how am I actually going to animate this thing, we're done.
Right.
So
that's pretty cool.
It's like that reminds me of the first time I used Rails. They have a highlight class, or they had a highlight class that would, the idea was that you'd submit a form and then re-render the table, and your new record would be highlighted with it. It would have its row with class equals highlight, and that would it would start out yellow and then slowly fade out over like 5 seconds. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, holy, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I think of when you talk about like fade in and fade up, and
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm actually wondering, like, is there a need here for like entanglement with the element in the same way that we have that with like Ember concurrency tasks, where if you do some like set timeout kind of thing on a modifier and like it tries to run a callback with the element reference, but then it's gone because the user's like navigated away after 5 seconds or something, are you going to run into problems? With Spencer's thing, you can return a cleanup function.
Well, hold on. But also too, if you have a callback that's referencing the element, I think that element still exists. It's just not rendered. Where the main issue with where the Ember concurrency helps with is in an Ember component, if you try to call set and the element's destroyed, you get that cannot call set on destroyed or destroying element error. But I think since you're not working with a Ember component, an Ember object in this case, that's not a problem. I think you'll still have the element. Now, if you try to do something like
set a CSS property or something,
I think that would still work. The element.
You're saying the DOM. You're saying it's in memory.
Yeah. It's not. It hasn't been
the DOM node or whatever.
The DOM node still exists. It hasn't been garbage collected. Maybe I don't know enough about like HTML element to know that like could you actually like put the element in a state that if you try to like set an attribute or property, it throws an exception.
Mm-hmm. Right. You're trying to set an attribute on something not in a DOM right now or something like that.
But that's totally valid. You can do new HTML element, start setting attributes and never put that thing
append it in the DOM. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I need to learn more about that stuff, but yeah, pretty cool. Tracking events is another one. You want to be able to track if a user clicks on something or scrolls something into view. Scroll into view even is like already a component, but now imagine just being able to put that right onto an element. It's great.
That's really nice. There's some other examples I think I saw in the
Infinity
RFC.
load or whatever.
Yep.
I mean, I guess the scroll into view thing is just like a component, but you could say, there's a lot you could do. I think there's a lot I think it's a pretty big, it's one of the biggest changes to come to the composition model in Ember since I can't remember when, contextual components maybe.
Yep.
So it's going to enable a lot of really cool stuff.
Also, the example in the RFC that I really liked was like if you've ever had to interop with like jQuery plugins or third-party libraries that decorate HTML elements, you're always like, okay, do I make a component that like wraps this, and then in did insert, I figure out how to apply it to the elements that I need to inside that component. It can get a little messy.
Yeah.
This you can render an input and then attach a modifier.
Picker.
Date picker.
Right to it.
Input masker, whatever you want, just right to that element. I think that's pretty cool. That gets you really close to, I guess, how the thing was intended to be used. Yeah. So. Basically,
anytime you have a component where in did insert element, you're doing this $, and then you're scoping it to the current tree of the component and finding a subselector just in order to like call like .date picker on it or .collapse or anything with it. You can now use a modifier, put it on that thing instead. If it's in the template, especially, you can just put it right there and you have access to the element. And again, you don't have to like give it an identifier of some kind. So it's really cool.
Yeah. Again, this is probably a good example of just like, you could do it before, but there's just that tiniest bit of friction. And now it's gone.
Yeah. I also saw some RFCs for like named blocks. I think they're starting to work on that again, which
nice.
We've talked about a bunch wanting that stuff. Modal header, modal dialogue, footer, body, and being able to like do that in a non-hacky way.
Yeah, I have so often I come back to this component. I want to make like a video uploading component that just exposes a whole bunch of stuff, like an actual upload button that really is a file input, but it looks like an upload button, an actual video player that can you don't even have to wait for your upload to finish. You can just read the file and play it locally. Yeah.
And you can start setting like trim values before it's even uploaded.
Yeah. It's just, there's a few things like that. Every time I go to the 2 times I've tried to build this, I end up having to like a component that yields out a whole bunch of other components. And then you as a caller have to basically rebuild all this stuff in your template, when really you're only interested in customizing like 1 or 2 things.
Right.
And that's why I'm excited about named blocks, because then I'll just let you customize the named part that you want to customize.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out at EmberConf. I think Octane is not going to be finalized by then, but it's basically going to be like probably most of the decisions will have been made as to what is going to be included in it, and it's just going to be about focusing on shipping that and getting it done. When Octane is kind of like released and the guides are updated and stuff, we're definitely going to be making some video content around that, because it's the most Ember's changed in years, maybe ever, in terms of you take a totality of angle brackets, named args, yielded blocks, if that becomes a thing, modifiers.
I'm trying to think like when was the last time a change was this big, and it's when the lexical scope and when we got components, when that stuff changed, and that was a long time ago. So this is a lot of new fun toys.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know the answer to this, but my guess is that we're going to see sort of a slow trickle out of new Octane features. I would be shocked if there's just one date where it's like, okay, all of Octane is now available.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to like now we're going to start using modifiers.
Yeah.
Right. So those might be part of Octane, but we're still going to start using them today.
Yeah, and like we've already used to a limited extent angle brackets. Those are released. Now they're trying to fill the void that everyone felt, which is that you can't use them with nested components, but they're going to fill that gap. But you can use angle brackets today for single word top level components. And so, yeah, Octane is about a mark in the development cycle. It's like not saying everything is going to release. The day that Octane is quote released is not when all those features are available. It's really just when those features have been available in a coherent way and it's ready to be used prime time. Like you don't see angle brackets in the guides, even though they've been there since 3.4.
Yeah.
There's a modifier manager now, but you're not going to see that until it's more finalized in the guides, right? So
I guess
named args.
We would still use modifiers though, right? Like today I don't use angle brackets.
Well, that's because of nested components thing.
Right.
What do we use that has been released? I mean, I guess we are kind of the on the end of the spectrum that's like we are more conservative and like to wait until things are in the guides because it's just easier for the whole community to refer to them. I might use some of those things in like an add-on. Like named args are pretty sweet because they just help you identify and differentiate. Like I really like them.
Yes. Same.
I've started using like this dot. Oh, we use this dot get. We don't use this dot get anymore.
Yeah, I don't think that's part of that. Might be.
Is that in the guides?
I think so.
I'm not sure. We'd have to check.
Yeah.
You're saying that might have just been a feature that came out.
I think that was like a 3.1 feature. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we don't use like decorators or ES6 classes. Like, we're going to use all that stuff when Octane comes out.
Right.
But certainly people living on the edge can use it today.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how we, as an app developer, I'm really happy with how we balance this.
Yeah.
So
I don't feel tension or I don't feel friction around that stuff for sure.
Yep.
But it's all very solving real world problems, and I can't wait to use those new APIs. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to keep my eyes on those RFCs for sure. And I'm really excited to see what the keynote's going to be. We're not staying up all night and making a video for the keynote this year. So it's always fun to be surprised. Although that was a good time doing that for Glimmer.
There should be like a betting pool. We know what the keynote's going to be about. It's going to be about all the new stuff coming in Octane.
Yeah. But
there's not going to be like any bombs. There's not going to be like, and one more thing.
There always kind of is though. They do a good job. They do a good job putting it together last year's. I remember really liking it. Just talking about the focus and what they're going to be working on. So, EmberConf is happening real soon. We got 2 trainings coming up. So we've been prepping those. If you're looking for something to do on Monday before EmberConf starts, you and your team, we do have 2 trainings we're putting on. One is real world animations and one is robust data fetching. So animations is going to be talking about Ember animated and Liquidfire and CSS animations, but kind of all those things that you need. And the data fetching stuff is, we talk a lot about data fetching on the podcast. So I think our goal there, I think it'll be good to think about what do we want people's takeaways to be? Because a lot of times, and this just happened in the video I made for this week's video for the current series going on EmberMap, which is that, part of the video views feature is like fetching data. And we always talk about what's the ideal way to do things. Like sometimes we just end up going there with our minds. But I think it's important too, actually. And I realized this as I was shooting the video, which is like, this is a situation where a video view model exists on the back end and it's not created by this current user of the client app. So there's no store.createRecord video view going on. That's the easiest case because the client knows about the new message. Let's take an email inbox, right? If you click new, your client app has done something like store.createRecord message and you can show it in the inbox list. But what if you pull out your phone and create a message and then like save it in the drafts or something? Your user on the computer hasn't done anything, but there's new data in the back end. So, we talked a lot about this the last few weeks. Like ideally there, you have some mechanism by which your server can notify all clients of new data that they care about. How do you know if you care about data? It's being rendered is one way to do it. So once you render a page, you know what the data dependencies are, And if any of those change in the back end, your back end tells your front end about it. Now, we don't have anything like that built in EmberMap, but it's still good to think about that because we can approximate that when we go to build the actual thing with the real world constraints that we have. So if I'm thinking about that, that's my ideal solution, what can I do today that approximates that? And the kind of answer I came up with is like, well, if I have one query representing this dynamic data, first of all, in the video series, you have like the series and all the clips that belong to the series. Then you have the video views, which change based as the user watches videos. Mm-hmm. So this is actually changing more often than this.
Yep.
It's almost like a dependency thing, directional thing. So it actually kind of makes sense to separate these two things.
Nice. Because we were chatting about, should these be one query? Should it be two separate queries?
Exactly.
Yes. Yep.
And we were also already talking about cacheability. And if you make all the data needs for an entire page into one complex query, it becomes hard to cache. If you separate them out, you pay the price of more requests, but you actually have things that are very easy to understand and cacheable.
Yep.
It's funny that how that relates, obviously, to things, how much they change, right? So if you have user-specific data that changes frequently, and you just can draw a circle around it right here, and then you put everything else that's basically the same for every user into this giant thing, it's cached, boom, you don't have to worry about it. And now, if I'm writing app code where I kind of know, again, ideally, the backend would just be able to tell me if any of this data changes, but in reality, we don't have something like that today. But I know when the user clicks next or the video player gets 90%, I know this one little part is probably changed, so I can just reload it now.
Nice.
And the UI is rendering from the store's representation of that data, so the UI will update. So it's a pretty cool way to think about it.
Are you doing like query.reload?
I haven't actually implemented yet.
Okay.
This was just like a strategy sesh.
Nice. You should try that because
Is that a query from storefront or query from store.query?
It's query from storefront, which under the hood is query from store.query.
And it has a reload.
So both, but yes,
cool.
It has a reload method that we have not used this yet on EmberMap. But I think it would be great for this sort of thing.
Very cool. So let me just pick your brain while I have you. So the component series list on the right, fetches the series and the clips, and that's over here. And then you've got the video player right here. And right now the video player is going to finish. It's going to send an on-end event, which is going to be handled by the route, which is going to say this.transition to clip.next or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to re-render that part of the page with the new video, but the series list is a component that's already been inserted. It's not going to do anything new, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you tell the series list that something's changed and it needs to reload?
Yeah, I have two options. So one, just kind of as you were telling that, my first reaction was, can you do it like a non-blocking fetch of this in before model? Or do you want this co-located with a component that's doing it?
Yeah, we refactored it so that this wouldn't be a blocking fetch. Oh, you said non-blocking
fetch in the so you use before model, but you don't block the render. So you basically say anytime the model.
So that way you're saying the route. Okay.
So that's one way to do it.
Because before model would get triggered again.
Yes, before model will get triggered because the model's changing, but you don't block so that you can still render the template seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
The other option is, and I've done this, I probably do this more often, is did receive adders in the component, and I look if you would have something like currently playing clip.
Okay, so I could pass like the clip slug down. And since that changed,
I would just pass the clip model,
or the clip
down.
Right.
And there's a great add-on.
Adders did change.
Yeah. Yep. And it makes it super easy to just say like when I get it did receive adder and it changed.
Yep.
So
cool.
That's that I would say like 80% of the time did receive adders because I like having like data fetching co-located with a component.
Yeah,
me too. So a lot of times, and then with storefront, I don't really have to worry about this different components firing off the same query.
Right.
Storefront will manage that for me.
Totally.
Which, by the way, you started this whole discussion with like, what do we want people to get out of the data fetching training? And I think that's one of the things. I think the thing that I want people to feel like I know when I render a component and I fetch data, like I know what's happening there.
Right.
And I don't feel like, did I just refetch this? Do I not have this data?
Right.
Should I just add reload true?
Right.
Like, so I want you to feel good about, I want you to feel good about components that render components that fetch data.
Right.
So that's sort of.
That's a good takeaway. Another one I just thought of was like, you have the video player here, you have the series listing here. When this thing renders, it could actually like have a callback that kind of sends out its query, and you like keep a reference to that in the ancestor. And it's because what we're saying is the ancestor in the route, the route in this case, we're changing from one video to the next, and that thing is already doing the logic that's like, it's 90%, send a video event that's 90%. And right there you could say, oh, I know I need to reload that query as well from the series list.
Yeah, that's really great. Having the component yield out the query, and then having the video player yield out the 90%.
Right.
And then the thing that sits above them that actually knows that, hey, a component and the video list are rendered, can manage that.
Yep.
That's a great example of LCA.
Right. Exactly.
So
lowest common ancestor. I mean, really what you want here is...
Folks, if you want to avoid this conversation, just skip about 55 minutes ahead.
This is what Ryan has to deal with. The real thing here, though, is like, really these things are like disconnected in some sense. And so you really just want the series list, the fact that it renders clip one, some video events. If those things ever change, it just knows about it.
Yeah, the back end is, you can imagine the back end's just always pushing. Yep.
Totally. Let's build it. VC funding. I got it. I can put you together a pitch deck. $100 million. I think that's all I'll take.
Yeah.
I wonder what, I would actually be interested to talk to folks who have gotten in such a spot or just ran into these issues over and over that they were basically forced to make a solution like this. I heard Derek talking on our product about how he has a client-side cache and, he's making a chat app. So you're going to run into this real early on. You've got Phoenix on the back end. You're doing real-time data to the front end through WebSockets. You have to consider the general case of like what happens when the WebSocket connection dies, what happens if my internet is lost. But you're basically thinking about it the way we think about Ember app development. But like in terms of the data transport, like it's such that you set that up in the general sense to handle it for all your models. So I would be interested other folks who are just not doing imperative calls ad hoc as the user moves through the app all over the place. I mean, that works great for simple cases, but eventually it's like, yeah, you want this more general purpose solution.
Yeah, I would also, just to add to this, would want to know like, does how robust does your system need to be? Because once you start talking about the server pushing data down to the client, you can very quickly start to come up with edge cases where it breaks or it doesn't work, or because the data's inconsistent. So I want to know, like, folks that have run into this, how much are you thinking about those edge cases, or is it we're just going to pump data over a WebSocket, and when there's oddities, we'll deal with them.
Right.
So
Right.
Sometimes I feel like I get you get like deer in the headlights with all the things that can go wrong. And you're like, I don't want to actually
deal with this. So you just kind of do it and it works 95% of the time or whatever. But like data inconsistency or like conflict resolution, all that stuff is like crazy hard.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe the 95% is okay. I mean, I know like the Rails WebSocket stuff, it's just like, hey, if you're there and I've got a message, I'm going to send it to you.
Yeah.
If you're not there, I don't know.
Right.
You can figure out another way.
Right. So if you miss a message, yeah. And that's where like the log-based storage stuff comes in.
Right. But there's
so much complexity there.
So if just the pub sub works 95% of the time, maybe that's just, you just pump data and.
Yeah. One true architecture, man.
Yeah.
You need to be able to Ember new, install Mirage. You got it working. It's a real server. You push it. Boom. You're hooked up just the way you would with Firebase. You write model fetch all blog posts. You each over them and you render it. You got your app right here. You open up the Mirage data viewer right here, and you start creating data, and it just works. And you haven't thought about anything. You've written your UI as if you just have a view, a lens into
into
the server
yeah.
data, and it just updates it. Pure declarative UI.
It's a dream.
Yeah, I just tweeted this that one day data fetching and SPAs is going to be as seamless as rendering is.
Yeah,
but it's not. Today is not that day.
No,
but rendering is just something we don't think about anymore.
Yes.
In most cases, I guess, like you could very performance intense situations, but just compared to the way we used to think about it versus now, it's basically been abstracted away from us. So I would
have no problem defending that position that you just took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Data fetching. Well, that's why we're giving a training on it, right?
Yeah.
Because there's lots to say. It's going to be fun.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
I'm excited. I really am excited for this training.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We're excited to see y'all at EmberConf. Those of y'all who are going to be there, be sure to come say hi.
Yeah,
if you listen to the podcast.
Yeah, if you listen, come up to us and say hi, because it's actually one of the things that I love when people are like, "Hey, I heard this last podcast." Blah,
yeah.
blah, blah. I love that.
Yeah, so. I know. I just imagine no one. We're just talking to an empty room here. I mean, we have like $1,000 equipment in here, tens of thousands even. My personal savings was used to buy all this, and it's just for us. So, can't wait to see everyone in Portland. Though it's going to be a good time. Get some of that those Indian tacos. Oh man, those are so good. Portland is weird. Portland is really weird. When you get in a cab in Portland, it's weird. Like the person's conversation with you is going to be weird, but they're going to take you to the food trucks and the Indian taco place and all this delicious food. So it's worth it.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Cool. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions you want us to answer, anything you want to say about this podcast, just keep it to yourself, because, as my mother used to tell me, if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything at all.
Or you could tweet at us at Ember_map.
And if you love us, go to iTunes and give us a 10-star review.
They only go up to 5, right?
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.